Hello and good morning.
Good
Today
morning.
is a very special webinar because I won't be the only face you're seeing. I won't be the only guy talking and blabbering all the time. I have my dear colleague Pascal with me today. And we are going to do a two-part webinar today. The general topic is the protocols that allow KLANG to talk to the outside world. So how can we connect and control things with more than just our processor and our app. So the first part is about MIDI and, to be more specific, the MCU protocol. And after that, we are going to dive really deep into nerd world with the OSC protocol and how we are using it. Maybe Pascal can say a few words to
Okay,
introduce
yes,
himself.
OSC it's actually one of my favorite topics. So we use OSC for everything, and we just want to share with you why it's so cool and why you should also use it, especially now as you have time.
Fantastic. All right, cool. So I'm going to start with the MCU part of that, and then we'll go back to Pascal. All right. So the ones of you who have followed our webinars a little bit have probably seen our integrated workflow webinars, where we can just integrate the KLANG workflow completely into the work surface and workflow of the SD and quantum range from DiGiCO. But if we don't use a DiGiCO, we can also control it directly. So we just send direct outs or submixes or a combination of both from our mixing board or our preamps into our KLANG device, which could be a Fabric, FIR or DMI KLANG. And we send the mixes out to either KLANG Quelle headphone amp or to our RF transmitters. And we can control everything that is happening inside of our processor directly with a device connected via network cable and running our KLANG app. This could be an iPad, an iPhone, a Mac, PC or Android device. But if we want to add a couple of faders, if we want some haptic control, we can just simply use an MCU compatible DAW controller. In our example, we are using a Presonus fader board. Of course, KLANG can also be used as a personal monitoring system, where the only difference would be that instead of connecting one device directly to our KLANG processor, we are connecting a Wi-Fi router, and we have multiple devices controlling multiple mixes, so the musicians can take care of their own mixes. But even if your musicians would like to have some haptic control, a fader under the fingers, we can simply connect one of those DAW controllers to the device directly. If we do that in the personal mode of our app, it will control only one mix, while in the example before, where a monitor engineer would do that, we would be able to control all the mixes. Speaking of controlling, so let's see which kind of functions we can take advantage of in this case. So, the surfaces of DAW controllers are mostly relatively similar. There are a couple of standardized buttons. There might be a little bit different naming depending on the model, but the basic functions are pretty much the same. So the first thing we can see when we connect the device is if our device has a scribble strips or LED strips over there, we can see the channel names directly from our KLANG session. With the select buttons, the channel select buttons, we can select the mixes between within our KLANG system. So select of channel 1 would get us to mix number 1. Select of channel 5 on the controller would get us to mix 5, and so on. Of course, there's also a control for mute and solo buttons, and obviously a fader control. On the management side of our session, we can access the fader screen directly by pressing the send button on our controller, and by pressing the panning button, we can get to the orbit view where we do the placement of our signals. And we're using the transport control to control our snapshots. So pressing the record button would create a new snapshot. Pressing the play button would fire a snapshot. Forward would bring us to our next snapshot, and rewind would bring us to our previous snapshot. So for that, we can just use directly the buttons, and we don't have to use only the touchscreen surface of our app. Although, since it's a bidirectional connection, we can of course still do that as well. So whatever is faster and easier for you is what you can use. The physical side of that would be very, very simple. We would just connect a USB cable between our controller and our Mac in case our controller has a USB interface in there. It's basically just MIDI over USB, and the device would show up as a USB interface. In case your controller only has standard MIDI connections, we would just use a simple MIDI interface. And in the same way, as soon as there's a MIDI port on your computer, it will show up in KLANG Control. I will show you that in detail in a few minutes. And if we go within our KLANG app to config and external control, that's where we find the MIDI MCU row. In my example over here, you can see that 4 MIDI ports are shown on my computer because I have a Fireface UFX with 2 MIDI ports connected to my computer, which I'm not using because no DAW controller is connected there. But also my PreSonus FaderPort 16 is showing up with 2 ports. 2 ports simply because one port always handles a block of 8 channels that can be controlled. And since my FaderPort 16 has 16 faders, it shows up as 2 ports. And then we simply connect KLANG channels to the remote control channels in the channels menu or the channels tab of KLANG app. We can take the lazy option here and just use the ripple function, which is the fastest and easiest way to get everything assigned. Let's do that with my live setup over here. So you can see my KLANG app that is running right now. So we go to config and external control. The app skin has nothing to do with this, so we can ignore that for now. The mixing console link is what we are using for the deep integration with the DiGiCO SD or Quantum Range consoles. And the MIDI MCU one is the one that we want to be working with right now. So I go to PreSonus FaderPort 16, port 1, and I can select the template, or if I have already assigned one, I can do that here. And this is actually where the channel mapping is stored. I think my colleague Pascal will get a little bit into detail later with remote mappings. So let's just select this one for now. And then we go to the channels menu, and here we can see the remote channel column. Here I simply select the first channel and select ripple down, and you can see it's directly going through here. If there's a stereo link channel, it's just showing up as one fader on the controller. So again, that makes it very easy. And that's pretty much what we need to do. There's not much more that we have to assign anywhere. So if I switch over to my controller, here we go. That's where we can use everything. I'm not sure if you can see it, but in the top row in the LED strips, you can see the channel names of my KLANG show file showing up directly in there. So that's good. Let me show you a mixed screen. All right, cool. So we see that here. Let me go to the faders. If I move a fader on my controller, that is also moving the KLANG fader. Of course, I can also do the other way around. So if I move the fader on the screen, it's of course moving the fader on the controller as well. If I press mute or solo for 2 channels, I can use that as well. And selecting a mix is happening through the selector button up here. So mix 4, mix 5, mix 16, mix 14, oh 13, sorry, and so on. So that is very easy to do. With the panning button, I can access directly my orbit view. And with the sense button, I get to my fader view. If I press the record button over here, you can see down here in our snapshot preview that I just created a new snapshot. I can also create a couple of more snapshots and then go through them by using the forward and rewind keys. Let me show you again a full view of the app. You can see there's, wait, I have to move myself out of the way. You can see this little line down here, which is showing the channels that the faders are controlling at this moment in time. So if I swap a bank, it will just move it by 8 channels. So now my first fader on my controller would be the bass channel. And let's go back, and now it's again the kick drum channel. Most controllers give you the option to either switch banks or switch faders, where you would just move it one channel after the other. And just to show you that real quick, if I would disable the second block in here of the controllers, now you can see that the controller strip here is only showing 8 channels. All right. Let's enable that again over here. Cool. So that's it. That's probably the shortest webinar chapter that we ever did, because it's just really simple to just get that going. The process to do that in the personal mode is exactly the same. And if the controller has a integrated USB MIDI port, it can also be recognized by an iOS device. So you can even have an iPad directly connected with an MCU controller for one musician who's then controlling his own faders. All right. One last thing before we move over to Pascal would be that some mixing boards actually have a MCU integration. One of the most used ones would be the Allen & Heath D-Live, GLD, or as I believe also the SQ range, which has the possibility to assign up to 32 MIDI faders. And the MIDI faders are remote control faders for our KLANG channels in here. So that gives you a haptic control directly from your mixing board. It's not a deep integration like we saw it from the DiGiCO integrated workflow, but it gives you haptic control. Since I don't have a D-Live over here, I would love to show you a little video where you can see how that behaves in action. So here we go. Bidirectional fader control, like I showed you before. You just move the faders of your MIDI layer, which controls our faders in KLANG app. It's as simple as that. We can switch between the mixes exactly in the same way as with my PreSonus, that we can just use the channel select buttons. We have mutes and solos going on. And of course we have the snapshot control, which we can assign directly to the user-defined keys on our surface. So you can see there that it's switching through the different snapshots. And of course the control app views can also be assigned to user-defined keys, where we can see the groups, the faders, the orbit, and the elevation view. And that's that. Quick note, we got a comment here from our friend Tom from Norway. He's just like this, using it. Fantastic. Tom, I hope you're doing well. There's one question coming in. Let me just answer that real quick. All the other questions we can reply to at the end of the webinar, where we have plenty of time to pick my brain or the much bigger brain of Pascal. So there's a question from Simon. Could I use this to allow a musician to control his wedge mix? Well, yes, you can. I'm just not sure if you should, if you know what I mean. Because controlling a linear mix is one thing that the musician is doing it himself. A wedge mix, if the musician doesn't understand how far he can go with the level, that could really easily lead to feedbacks or to, a way too loud stage sound. But essentially, a KLANG mixer is just combining input channels and sending them out to a channel. So if you connect a wedge or a amplifier to that, of course, there will be audio coming out of that. I hope that answers your question, Simon. Okay, cool. So let's move over to Pascal. Whenever I'm talking to one of you guys about interesting or deeper functions, and I say, I will call you back in a couple of minutes, the chances are very high that I'm on the phone in that time with Pascal. So he is our mastermind. And by the way, he also is the guy who had the first idea for our KLANG products and for the KLANG processing. So, cool dude, very nice guy, and he's live here from Aachen, Germany. Over to Pascal. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Phil, for the really warm words. So let's have a look at more or less behind the scenes. What is going on if we have control between all the products? So we use OSC extensively. And for most of you who are familiar with MIDI, what Phil just showed you in an application, MIDI is really limited. So we have 7 bits for values. So for all of you who want to know what that is, we can transmit numbers, whole numbers between 0 and 127. So that gives you a dynamic range of 42 dB. This is not really much. And MIDI has been around since 1983. Very cool applications, but in the last years, we have some recent developments, technological developments, which allow us to do more stuff. So with OSC, we overcome this hurdle of 7 bits and go to 32 bits. So that also allows us to have positive and negative numbers. Number range is much more expanded, and we would have a whole number dynamic range of 192 dB. So this is a big changer. Next slide, please. So when the guys at Berkeley in California had OSC in mind, open sound control, they had sound applications and they didn't want to use MIDI. So they wanted also to use a network, a computer network, IP network. And if you have a look here, we would have different devices on that network, as you also have now on front of house monitors. They all most of the time share one network. And on that network, there might be the engine, the DSP, that gets audio in. But let's look on the control side where OSC is designed for. So the DSP wants to send out meters. And as you see here, it sends meters to an iPad. And it clearly says /meters. So you can understand it's human readable. Okay, there should be meters coming in. And meters, it's fine to use whole numbers as we just saw. But what if we have a laptop and from that laptop we want to control the panorama? So we want to control /pan, channel, number 2, and control the panorama. So whole numbers is probably not working out there. So OSC also offers floating points, so decimal numbers. So we have data types. We could have on the same network a hardware device which has faders and sends out OSC to control the gain for channel 1, for example. That all happens at the same time and they can communicate with each other. And another really important functionality we would need is, let's assume we have a smartphone and we want to have a look at the channel label and we also want to change it. So for a channel label, a whole number or decimal number doesn't work. We want to have a clear label, so OSC also offers text strings to be transmitted. So we have IP networks. OSC allows us also to bundle messages, for example, for the meters where we have a lot of values that should go together. We could put them in one OSC message. We could bundle all messages together that they actually arrive at the receiver at exactly the same time and are shown at the same time. And we also have the possibilities to include time flags. So really powerful, and it's much more powerful than MIDI, but let's have a look how it actually works and why we also need some time to configure things. Next slide, please. So where is it used? In Pro Audio, of course, we at KLANG use it, otherwise we wouldn't have done this webinar. And as said, we use OSC extensively. We use it between all the apps that we have. and the hardware, but we use it also internally, and I'll show you in a second how that works. For most of you who have seen the SD quantum range console link that we came up with last year, this also is based on OSC, and that means also DiGiCO uses OSC. This is where we could start the this protocol that we're using. OSC is used in the DiGiCO consoles between the console and the iPad apps. But it's also used in other applications. For example, the L-Acoustics ELISA processor uses OSC between hardware and their software, but also to interface to the outside world. And D&B Soundscape is the same. They use internally something different, but to the outside world, they offer OSC. And also Midas consoles use that. But we'll have a look in a second why that does not necessarily mean that all these devices work together just like that. If they have a tag that says, okay, I can speak OSC, it doesn't mean that you could plug them together and you'll have the control. For example, with the DiGiCO software, for all of you who have seen it, there's also user interface in it, and we need to program in some meaning to the different values that we're setting. But OSC is the common language we speak. And for the software side of things, we have very cool software called Touch OSC. I'll show you in a second why I think it's really cool. But also DAWs like Reaper offer OSC support right out of the box. We have QLab, which is used in theater, for example, to program some automation things that uses OSC, and also a very other cool tool, which is called Osculator. So you see, we have all these tools available, and they serve a specific need that we have. We can drag these tools, we can bring all the hardware and software tools together and make them speak to each other. It does not necessarily mean that they speak right out of the box together, but without really fancy programming knowledge and without talking to the manufacturers to ask them to program something in, it is possible to get them to do the job. And this is where we just want to tell you how it is done and what are the tools we need to look at. So how does it actually internally work? OSC, as we just learned, is designed for computer networks, IP networks. So that means we have to deal with, first of all, the transport layer, not going into too much detail, but there are two different protocols we could use. One is UDP and the other is TCP. The main difference is just UDP is just very simple, send out a message and don't care if it's delivered or not. And TCP is more advanced, introducing some overhead, might be a little bit slower, but it makes sure that the message is actually delivered correctly. So with UDP, messages get dropped if there is any error in any device on the way from the source to the receiver. But do we really care about every single packet? And if you imagine that you have a fader and you just move the fader really, really gently, there are hundreds of values sent per second. So if one value really gets dropped, it's probably not that important. On the other hand, we have to say, for modern computer networks that are well designed, the chance that a packet really gets dropped is really, really low. We rarely see it. And if we see it, there's something wrong, for example, with a Wi-Fi connection, or we have a network loop or something like that. Okay, so we, as many other manufacturers, use UDP for that. It's easier, gets the job done. And on the other part, we need to make sure where the message is delivered to. This is the IP address. Of course, many of you know IP addresses. This is the 192.168.1.200. Just picked out one as an example. And I always like to think of an IP address which is in a specific country, first number in a specific city, second one, then in a specific street, in a specific house. So we have these four numbers that narrow down a specific house, which is a network device. And then there is a port. So why is there also a port? Imagine in a house that could live several people, and it's really important that, this mail is for me. So there could be a nickname or the real name. So we could have different ports for one application. So each person will be an application, and each application listens to one or more ports, but it's not really a good idea that several applications listen to the same port. Otherwise, they would steal each other messages and don't talk to each other that they stole the message or opened that. Okay. And now, how is the OSC message actually looking like? We just take, for example, the OSC message we use for KLANG. So every manufacturer defines their own message, but they follow a specific, syntax. It always starts with a /. KF stands for Klangfabrik, and then another /. UI could be the user index, and then it's followed by a number. So we're sending something to Klangfabrik. So Klangfabrik knows it when it receives the message. It's a user index, okay, then followed by 1, so it's addressed mix number 1, and followed by something that reads gain in dB. Okay, so we are sending a gain, which is the master gain. Next is we need to define what kind of data type do we want to use. We just learned we have whole numbers as MIDI used in a limited range, which would be an I for integer, or we have F for floating point numbers, so decimal numbers. We use for the gain also floating point numbers, and as the argument, we just send the value of a knob or a fader. In this case, it would be minus 4.3, and that is the gain in dB. So this is basically a very simple OSC message we just looked at. In real life, OSC message, it could look a little bit more advanced. That means I could have several data types. For example, I could have an XY plot and I want to have the X and Y coordinates in one message. I would have 2 data types, maybe 2 floats, and I would have then 2 arguments. But this is the common language. We have human readable address patterns. Everybody can clearly understand, okay, this is how it's done. If it's then mix number 2, I see where the mix goes. Every manufacturer defines it in a little bit in a different way, but it's human readable, good to understand, and we have tools available to show you that and manipulate that. So speaking of tools, why do we actually use it at KLANG? This is more a look behind the scenes. First of all, OSC is really powerful, and we have a strong background in research, so that means we used OSC before. So we had some knowledge of it, that it is available, and we found that it's really cool. But why do we use it? Let's talk about why don't we just build our own protocol? What would be the advantages of our own protocol? It would, of course, be really, really efficient. We would use every single bit and just have a very compressed network message that is really application specific for a KLANG product. It would be maybe faster. But what happens if I need to add a new parameter? Or if for some reason I designed it to be used with 64 channels, but now someone wants to send 128 channels and the protocol is not designed for it. So there's a good reason to use something which is more open. It has a little bit overhead, but it's human readable. We can easily extend it, and we have all the tools available that we can use. And if you have a look at the GUI that we just see in the middle, this is actually one of the first GUIs we implemented when we had a hardware that we needed to be controlled. And we've done that with Touch OSC. Really cool application, runs on iOS, for example. You can, in a couple of minutes, put together a simple graphic interface and assign OSC address patterns and assign a value of that specific controller that should be sent out. So this is how you could create your own custom interface. Just a hint, cool software. Why do we also use OSC? In our application, we have different network devices. We know that we have wireless and wired devices, many iPads, smartphones all over the stage for personal monitoring, but we would have third-party devices, but also a laptop, Windows or Mac running software. So we needed something to be run on an IP network, not our own protocol, but something open. We believe in that open implementation. And we actually use it everywhere, even in hardware development, in software testing, hardware testing, in manufacturing. It's really powerful, and we can control every single press of a button with OSC. not every, but almost every. And there are implementations available for all the different platforms, which is really, really cool. So one of the most important tools that we use, most of you that have ever tried to troubleshoot a network are familiar with Wireshark, a really cool network analyzer, open source software, and of course, Wireshark has built-in OSC support. So if you just go ahead, have, for example, a KLANG app and a KLANG device on your network, just install Wireshark, open it, and in the filter, just the box on the top, just type in OSC, and you're going to see all the OSC messages coming into your computer and leaving the computer. And it also has built-in OSC decoder. So you just open or click on that message, open it, and you're going to see what's inside. You're going to see the address pattern, which is human readable. And then you're going to see what kind of data types and what kind of numbers are transmitted. So Wireshark helps you to understand if you have any device that speaks OSC and you don't know what kind of commands are actually used, you could use Wireshark and just have a look at it. Really easy to understand. On the other hand, it's more like the counterpart. We developed a small command line tool for Windows and Mac that's called KLANG OSC. For any one of you who's interested in, please just write an email to support@klang.com. We're happy to give you access to that little piece of software. It's for free. Excuse me. And what this software does is actually the counterpart of Wireshark, because this allows you to send out OSC messages. And as you see in the command line, we use KLANG OSC. That's the tool. It's followed by the IP address. So where is it going to? The port number. Okay, what kind of application on that device should listen to it, followed by the OSC message itself, and then data type F for the gain in dB and 0. So we're just sending channel 2 of mix 1 to 0 dB. This tool could also be used if you want to do some customization work. For example, you want to start your mix with always the same settings and you don't have that programmed in a template. Or, for example, you have a surround setup and you want to tweak loudspeaker positions to be at exact positions, like minus 30.4 degrees to the left. It's really easy to send it like that. On our blog, klang.com/OSC, we have an extensive guide of all the OSC messages, even the ones that you could not see with Wireshark, because they're just built in for testing purposes or to interface with a third-party hardware and software. And now comes the more advanced applications. Oscillator is, let's call it a MIDI OSC mapper. As, for example, Phil has shown his PreSonus fader board, you could use the fader board connected to Oscillator. And in Oscillator, you're going to see all the incoming MIDI messages. Then you just click on one MIDI message and assign, okay, if that MIDI message comes in, what do I want to do? I want to, for example, create an OSC message if that MIDI message comes in, and I want to send that out to, for example, a KLANG device. So with Oscillator, you could build your own MIDI OSC converter, so to speak. And as MIDI, now you know, has a limited number range from 0 to 127, and you want to control maybe a gain. It doesn't make sense to send out a gain between 0 and 127. So Oscillator also allows you to rescale that. For example, map that range to minus 100 to 0 dB. So this is an application, unfortunately, only available for macOS, but it's cool to check out if you want to do some custom work. On the other hand, more from a research background, we used MATLAB a lot for programming. It's a programming language environment. And at our university, we programmed or implemented the ETA toolbox. It's an open source acoustic toolbox. It allows for acoustic measurements, simulations. And within that, I also implemented an OSC class. And that is extensively used at KLANG still today, because we test every single new software version with that. So we can route audio to any specific, from any specific input to any specific output, even use the analog outputs as you see in the picture here, and measure that we don't have any audio glitch if there's a new version coming in, and have an automated protocol script that triggers all the OSC commands, routes audio everywhere, uses faders, and then we see the result and measure that. So it is really cool to have a protocol that we can use in many, many different applications, because that allows us to solve different purposes, different needs that we have, and get the job done. And now this is where the ends meet. What Phil said in the beginning, the MCU is also based in KLANG app on a translator. And if you just have a look at this piece of code that we have there, so in KLANG app there is, let's say, a programming language for a translator built in. And I'm pretty sure that no one actually has a look at it. It lives in the KLANG app folder. But inside there, you're going to see the source, which starts with /MIDI. So what we actually do internally is, if you select a MIDI device, we map MIDI to OSC. We use the /, we break down the MIDI according to the datasheet and make it more human readable. And this allows us then, in this translator language we've written, it's all in XML, so also open, human readable. And you can map and say, okay, I want to use this kind of MIDI node 1. I know these are the different buttons on that specific controller, and I want to use it to have the KLANG app screen change the mixes. So this is all built in. It has some more functionality, so mapping of the different parameters, but it also allows you to have more programming style if clauses. For example, only if this value goes higher than that, I want to trigger a specific command and have variables built in. And this kind of translator is used to make MIDI MCU working. So we translate that to OSC, and then this kind of MIDI OSC messages are converted to a KLANG understandable OSC message. Excuse me. And the same is true, for example, for the DiGiCO console link. As I said in the beginning, that even if two devices speak OSC, it does not necessarily mean they can really speak to each other, because they don't know what kind of OSC address pattern to look for. And with this translator in KLANG app, we just define these address patterns, we convert it, and then tell our application where to send it to. Send to the actual KLANG app itself to change some screen commands, or to send it out to back to a console, or back to, for example, in our case, the Klangfabrik or DMI card, to change mix settings. So this is also built in KLANG app. And our question to you is, what are your jobs you want to do, customization jobs? And of course, we cannot support all of these, but we might be able to point you into a good solution. So we have open tools available. We have documented all our OSC, and we just want to learn from you, what are your needs? What do you want to customize? And maybe we can help to get that done. So thanks for listening. I want to hear a lot of questions, please. Back to Phil, the moderator.
Well, yeah, I'm quite intimidated, and I'm gonna shut up now because you know, what else should I add to that? No, but what that was really interesting, and OSC, to be honest, from me as a sound engineer, more kind of type, you know, who's not a programmer or something like that. It can look a little bit intimidating at first glance, but if you look at it in the structure and in the way that Pascal just explained it, it actually is very logical. And if you actually see it as the power to control everything in exactly the way that you want it to do, that gives you pretty much limitless possibilities there. Yeah. So yes, please let us know if you have any cool ideas, any things that you would like to do. If you have any really specific applications where you would like to do a different workflow, faster workflow, or whatever. Very curious about that. So again, if you want to have access to the KLANG OSC tool, or if you have some further questions on that, just send us an email to support@klang.com. Maybe our colleague Marcus, who is in the comments, can just type that into the comments. And as always, let us know if you have any questions in general, if you have any wishes for further webinars, if you want to have a closer look to certain features or functionalities. And now, I would say, let's take a look at the questions. I think I saw some come in already. One was not a question, it was a comment from our Italian captain, Stefano. Hey, how are you doing? That was a reaction to the question of if we could control a wedge with that. I think that is the perfect answer to that. A monitor engineer has 4 or 5 active brains, a musician has only one, and is busy playing music. That's exactly the right answer to that. All right, let's see. There's one little comment. I like technology. Thank you very much. We appreciate that. I think here's a question from Carlinho, or Carlinhos. Sorry if I misspelled that or mispronounced that. Any suggestions on how to implement head tracking into the system? Any hardware that was previously tested for that function? Pascal, do you want to take that or should I?
I can.
Okay.
So, for example, if you take Osculator, Osculator also offers a Wii control interface. So if you have a Wii controller, you could use that tool to create the sensation of head tracking and use that to convert it. So we don't have any external hardware that we've tested or that we would recommend to use that speaks either MIDI or OSC and could be used for that purpose. And but if you have any specific hardware, yeah, just let us know, and we could also point you to the right commands. So again, on klang.com/OSC, we also have OSC features available if you want to use that and get your own controller done. But I don't think that anyone would wear a Wii controller on top of their head. But at home in these days, it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Well, I mean, speaking of that, you remember that case we have a long-term Klang user band where the bassist wanted to use some kind of possibility for that, so he just used gaff tape to tape his iPhone to his bass in order to have a fluent movement with that.
It's hip movement, right? So hip tracking, but it works, by the way.
Absolutely. But actually, in some of the other webinars, we got some questions from, especially from guys from the theater world, where it was about, can we use things like black tracks or something to have movements of artists directly followed with that. As far as I know, black tracks speaks OSC. At least some of the trackers speak OSC. So exactly with the stuff that Pascal was telling you about, it should be possible to actually combine systems.
Yeah, just another comment on that. So the hardware I just showed on that slide, that's of course not an extensive list. It's just some main products that we see that are used by Blacktracks, uses OSC. Also the Astro Spatial Audio uses OSC. And I'm pretty sure that Timex just recently also included OSC. So if you want to get that to work, I think we've shown you some tools to look into that and make it work. At this point, it's not officially supported, but whoever wants to dive in, it could be even this kind of translator file that lives in Klang app that you could use for that. So you must be really bored in these times to do that, but it's a nice job to be done then.
Okay, all right, cool. There was a little comment from Tom over here. That was very good. Nice to see you, Pascal. that over to
Nice
you.
to see you, Tom. Cool.
Okay, there's another question here from Simon. I've been learning some basic LUA to enable me to insert markers in Reaper. Could I use the translator to achieve this?
Our translator. We are very selfish. Our translator that we implemented is designed for exactly 3 devices. It's the KLANG app and the KLANG Fabric, and the third one is one external control device. So, and I think it's more like we have an external hardware controller that we want to integrate in the KLANG app and KLANG Fabric environment. This is where we can use our own translator for. If you want to use oscillator, for example, that should work. Yeah, you can decode the OSC address pattern. You can have access to every single element in it. It could also be done in the KLANG app translator file, but I don't think that it's convenient to use it for that purpose. Yeah, but I think oscillator could be a good tool. So if not, please let us know what the specific application is. Would be interesting to learn more about that if it's also related to the KLANG hardware.
Cool. All right. Hey, Simon, so just get in touch with us at support@klang.com for further info for Pascal. All right. There is a comment from Chris. Hey, nice to
Chris.
see you. Long time no see. Awesome explanation, Pascal. Not smart enough to ask intelligent questions yet.
I don't believe that.
I would love to rewatch this. I just wanted to say that I really doubt that he would not be able to ask intelligent questions about that. So, Chris, nice to see you. Hope to see you again very soon. Maybe in one of the trade shows, when we can get out of the cages again. Cool. There is a comment from Mike. Hey, Michael. Thanks for the insight, Pascal and Phil. Great to get a look under the hood at how it's all working and looking forward to experimenting with the OSC capabilities. Very cool. Hey, let us know. As always, you know where to find us when we can help. And there is a question from Ital. Sorry if I mispronounced it. Do you know if PD, C-Sound have any application in live sound?
I don't know. Do you, Phil?
No, sorry.
Sorry.
I have not come across that application yet. So if you have any specific ideas and specific questions on how you would like to use that, again, get in touch with us, and then we can figure that out. But that's something that didn't come across at this point yet. Okay, Chris, there is a follow-up question. I think you mentioned another software than oscillator, Touch OSC. Any more info on that, Pascal?
Yeah, the name is Touch OSC. It is commercially available, so it's not free. I think it's only available for iOS, so you're probably gonna hop to the App Store and check it out. Just quickly explain how it works. So on a computer, you just install the editor. I think that one is for free, so you can download that for Windows or Mac. With the editor, you have the possibility to drag and drop some basic UI elements, such as faders, knobs, labels, LEDs, and I think XY. So a lot of stuff is in there, and you can just drag and drop, build your own interface by just designing it where you want the elements to be. And then you just right click on an element and say, okay, I want this element to send out that specific type of OSC message, rescale the values to my needs, and fire that. So it's really interesting software to experiment with. And if you want to, you can actually use it along with our blog. It shouldn't take too long, and have, let's say, a basic app that allows you to control master volumes of specific KLANG mixes.
One little follow-up question from my side there, Pascal. Isn't there a software called Lemur?
Oh
Isn't
yeah.
isn't that also a touch an OSC compatible one? Because I know that some people did some really
Yeah.
interesting things because it has ballistics for movement, for example, which is more used for a creative use case,
Mhm.
probably more than the in-ear monitoring use case that we are usually working with. But I think that might also be an interesting software to
Yeah.
take a look at.
Yeah, definitely. I think I just listed the software that we use or used regularly, but that will be on the list. And also Max MSP should be on the list as well.
Very cool stuff, yeah.
But we don't really use it on our daily work.
All right. There is another question from Kalinos. Thank you for this webinar and the answer. It's awesome that KLANG integrates with OSC. However, I probably stay away from the gaff tape and bass guitars. I totally get that one. But it's a cool idea. Why not? All right. There's another question from Michael. Is this in the context of recording a live show? If you're using snapshots in KLANG, might be possible to use the firing of the snapshot to trigger a marker. Not sure if the snapshot names are part of the OSC implementation, but if so, you could maybe grab them into Reaper that way. Oh, that is not a follow-up question. I think Michael replied to the question earlier.
Yeah, yeah. I would also say that. Yes. So I understand the use case better now. I think it would be possible. Yeah. So if someone is interested in doing such advanced stuff, please let us know. We just quickly will tell you what to do. So basically, your app needs to communicate once and do a handshake with a KLANG hardware, and then you would also get the snapshot fire commands, and you could use that, for example, to, yeah, I don't know, create markers whatsoever in live recording. Yeah, it totally makes sense. It's possible. It takes a little bit more than 5 minutes, I would say. But as we now all have time, then not all, but it could be a really cool application, yes.
Yeah, and speaking of snapshots, just to just round this up, I know that quite a few of our clients are using OSC commands to fire snapshots on multiple devices, which in many cases is done with QLab or similar softwares, where basically firing a command in QLab would change the snapshot in a DiGiCO console, in a KLANG, exchange a KLANG snapshot, and so on. So you can trigger all kinds of things with that. That would be one of the easiest and probably most used applications for something like that.
Actually, there's also a funny story I didn't tell before, but Phil, you probably remember that we have a French monitor engineer. And before the DiGiCO link was available, he was a very early day user.
I remember.
Yeah, he just wrote to us and asked, are you guys using OSC? And just pointed out, okay, here's the blog. If you have any specific questions, after a couple of days, he came back and said, no, thanks, I've done it. So that was it. And I think you, Phil, met him a year later, and he just has implemented his own DiGiCO osculator KLANG link at these early days.
That was very impressive.
That was really cool.
Yeah, that was very good. I think it was for a big musical tour, Les Commandements, I think, something like that.
Yeah.
So it's a few years ago, but it was very interesting. Okay, cool. There is a question from Klaas. Hey, buddy, how are you doing? So, quick warning before I even read that question, Pascal. Klaas is a guy that is very similar to the French guy that we just mentioned.
Oh.
He figures out a lot of things, and he is basically all the time making things work that should actually not work. So he's our Dutch magician. Okay, so Max MSP integrated to Ableton is a good alternative to automate the OSC messages. Good hint. Yeah, thank you very much. I know that quite a few people also are using Max MSP for some advanced and crazier things, also in combination with KLANG. I'm thinking of those, controller.
Oh, the hand glove.
Yeah, gloves and all that stuff. So that's not for monitoring side, but more for the creative application for it. Okay, there's a comment from you. Glad you guys are dealing with this part, not me. Hey, you, to be honest, I'm totally with you on that, because whenever I have to dive deeper into anything like that, I will just start crying and call Pascal, and he usually helps me with that. So, but yeah, glad you enjoyed it.
I have to say, don't be afraid. You said it's really intimidating at first, but there are good tools available. For example, Touch OSC is easy to use. So if you want to dive into that and not get not die at the first day, then that's a good alternative.
Yes, and I mean, I have gotten things to work already after some explanation from Pascal. So it is definitely doable, even if you're just a dumb sound guy like me. So I think there's one more question here from Davis. Can I use oscillator to control KLANG in demo mode, because I don't have a physical KLANG device at home? So first of all, we should change that. You should have a KLANG device at home.
Yeah.
I'm KLANG shaming you right now, Davis. Yeah, over to Pascal. I think that is possible, right?
Yes, it is possible. So for all these unfortunate times, we have built in a very, very tiny Klangfabrik into KLANG app that is controlling the demo mode. So once you start the demo mode, there's a tiny, tiny Klangfabrik that can do this limited processing in more or less real time on a smartphone, and that could be controlled as well. The only drawback is that you would not see any of the messages going between the KLANG app user interface on the one side and the mini Klangfabrik that lives inside KLANG app. So if you open Wireshark, you would not see this communication. But they send OC messages to each other. So yes, you can control that. And I think if you write to support at klang.com, we're going to send you the KLANG OSC. And there are some examples built in which allow you to control KLANG app. So if you want to experiment with that and just get to know OSC and have a good starting point, yes, that's possible.
Cool. All right, I think that's it with the questions for now. Guys, thank you very much for joining us in this webinar. Thank you, Pascal. I know you're very busy in R&D right now, so thank you very much for making the time for us here. This was really fascinating, even for me, and I am quite deep into all that stuff already. So, if you have any further questions, get in touch with us. If you have any suggestions for further webinars or specific topics, please get in touch with us. We are very curious about that. If you have any comments, feedback, also just let us know about that. We will continue doing webinars for as long as we all have to stay in our cages. So I think probably tomorrow we will announce the schedule for next week, where we'll do the next webinars. And yeah, we're looking forward to seeing you all in the next webinars. And of course, in person.
Also from my side, thank you very much for listening and staying with us. And thanks a lot for the cool questions. That also helps us to understand how you would like to use your KLANG gear, and how do you want to interface all the different tools you have. So share this with us. Really interesting.
All right, cool. Have a great day. Have a great weekend. We're nearly there. Stay safe, stay healthy, and see you next time, guys.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.